Today I wanted to talk a little bit about basic sword handling in martial arts. These are pretty generic, not standardized to any one style. There's a lot of things that happen in different sword arts that are very much etiquette based, that are not like the right way to do something universally, but are very specific to a style. Things like shiburi noto, which you see in different styles of like bato or iai-battojutsu. Those can be very stylized, and there isn't one correct way to do it versus a different way. Most can justify what they're doing, but it's varied. But there are some pretty standard things that you can kind of look at and go through that apply to almost all arts that use a katana or a pseudo katana, like a bokken or bokken. So first thing to talk about is the grip. Grip is very awkward for most people when they first start doing sword. It feels very unnatural. It takes a while to get used to. But the idea is that you really want to have the majority of your hand behind the mune, behind the back of the sword. The handle's about a foot long. Typically it varies. Usually there's some kind of a notch on the weapon to tell you where you're supposed to be. And you want your finger to be right up about on that notch, basically. Try not to let the finger extend out. It's kind of a bad habit if you're not used to using swords that have tsuba or a guard. So both hands are going to be on top. Note though that my elbows have a significant bend to them. So my arms are not straight, and I really don't want this shape across the top of my hand. This is called a hammer grip. It's considered wrong in pretty much every sword style there is. There's a modified version used for one-handed stuff, but for the most part, note just how angled my hands are. I have a lot of meat up behind. Some styles teach keeping the pinky off the back. I don't actually prefer to do that. I don't consider it wrong. For me, it doesn't work very well. I really like to have the pinky on the ska so that I have more grip. So again, from the top, you see I'm very much behind. My elbows should be able to bend quite a bit though. This takes a little bit of getting used to. Most people, when they rotate the hands over, the elbow locks out and they feel like they can't move, so they relax this grip and they're like, that feels better. This is pretty much just wrong. If you look at the backs of my hands, they're coming in towards the bokken, and my thumb is kind of the only thing that's supporting it from the back. If you're hitting hard targets like armored people, this doesn't work very well. So this is not taught in pretty much any sword style. They are all going to rotate to have a large amount of mass behind the impact side. I do not use a hanmi. My sword style does not use a hanmi. We use, it's called iai-battojutsu, or just kind of a basic stance. So that's what you'll see me in. Chudan kamae, middle posture, shoulders over hips. Really don't want to see this sort of laid back posture that you see even in some kendo styles where the hips are forward from the chest and the shoulders. Shoulders should be above hips, if not a little forward, chin tucked in back. You really don't want to be leading with your head when you're doing swords because you're going to get hit. So, Chudan kamae, Jodan kamae. Some styles will teach stepping forward to come up into Jodan kamae. And in my style, we usually let the tip come up a little bit and behind. Again, that is a stylistic thing. You'll see some styles that do very flat. Some have it very kind of upper pointed. Very few styles will have Jodan kamae with the tip drop below the handle. It's almost always flat or a little elevated above the handle. So. One place that I see a lot of trouble is in what's typically called hasono kamae. Hasono kamae first come up to almost Jodan, and then you're going to drop down the side. Here's where a lot of people really kind of mess this up, in my opinion. The elbow rides high, and it points that way. Any kamae, any postural position that's a steady state, you want to be able to attack directly from. You should have at least one attack that you can do from any posture you're holding yourself in. From here, it's obvious. It's just cutting down, kiriotoshi. From waki no kamae, you've got a keisa, right? If I'm pointed this way, note I've now angled the edge away from me and my elbow's up. The only place I can attack without changing what I'm doing is over there. If I'm dealing with a target in front of me, I cannot point this edge over here. This makes no sense. It's just wrong. Edge needs to be pointed forward so that I have the ability to reach out and cut with one move. That brings me to moving between kamae. When you're moving between kamae, typically you also want to maintain the ability to attack. It's a ski, S-U-K-I, to kind of draw an attack when you can't do anything. So if I'm standing in, say, a chudan kamae, and I decide to just go back here, the entire time I'm moving behind me is a welcoming to an attack. I don't have a place I can attack. The edge is pointed down. That's my attack moment. I can't ski, you're over there. This is not great. It shows inattention to detail. So what am I gonna do to get back there? I'm gonna come up to jodan, drop into hasso, and then from here, I'm gonna rotate the hands down so that the edge stays in a place where it could cut towards my target at all times until I come to the bottom. Here, I'm still in a place where I could cut up and out, right? So those are kind of working through the basic kamae. In tameshigiri, when you're cutting actual targets like my school does, we'll also use a horse stance a lot, where we'll come up and we'll come down to a horse stance because we're going to be doing dogiri cuts through a target and keeping those flat. That's also something that you'll see pretty commonly. I haven't seen that stance very much in Aikido, honestly. Typically, if you're going to do a do cut, it's kind of coming up, and it's really more of a gyaku-kessa or a kiriage, cutting upwards. So, and then let's talk about one cut, just because I see this a ton in Aikido, and some sword styles too, but really a lot in Aikido. And that is a gyaku-kessa cut, meaning you're cutting like kessa-giri, but you're coming from lower to upper. And what typically happens is about halfway through the cut, the biceps take over and people curl. This turns a whole body mechanic into a bicep curl. Granted, you're theoretically already through the target, hopefully, or your enemy at that point. When you do that, however, and I stop moving, again, where is my target? It's not there anymore. The only place I can attack is back there. So unless you plan on attacking to that back corner after a cut like this, you basically have just left everything open and exposed to your supposed opponent at the end of that cut. What I teach and what my sword style recommends doing is cutting up and then ending with the edge still pointing down. So my tip is still pointed at target. It's not a great attack, but frankly, if someone was to attack from the same line that the camera's at, I can at least turn, I can block. I do have a ski attack, although it's not the best attack, it's something. The other thing I see from this cut a ton, especially when people first do tameshigiri, is they forget that the hands need to basically stay locked in place. So, meaning locked in on the tsuka. There's a couple times they'll change, but they shouldn't change much. So, what will happen is people will drop the sword down and let this hand rotate because it's much more comfortable. The problem with that is if I was to come back to my kamae, that's my shape. That's how I'm holding the sword now. This is just really lazy. Don't do it. If you see people do it, think twice about what they're doing. So as I come drop down, my hands are in exactly the same posture. Any of these positions I'm in, my hands are in the exact same shape, even when I've dropped down to here. Yes, that's awkward. It's a bit of a stretch. It's hard to rotate the edge hard enough to get it facing forward. But this is just absurd, frankly. It's not a good cut. It looks ridiculous. Please don't do it. If you find yourself in this position, remind yourself, hey, all right, I'm going to come back to chudan. If you end up like this, ask yourself if that's a good idea. This is way better. You've cut, you're back. You can move, you're flexible, but this is crazy. So, a couple quick tips on bokken use. Pretty generically, aiki-ken, sword arts, again, lots of differences, but there's a lot of similarities too.